By adhering to a method which seems to me decisive in a phenomenology of images, and which consists of designating the image as an excess of the imagination, I have accentuated the dialectics of large and small, hidden and manifest, placid and aggressive, flabby and vigorous. I have also followed the imagination to a point well beyond reality in its task of enlargement, for in order to surpass, one must first enlarge. We have seen how freely the imagination acts upon space, time, and elements of power, but the action of imagination is not limited to the level of images. On the level of images, too, it tends towards extremes, and there are ideas that dream. For instance, certain theories which were once thought to be scientific are in reality vast, boundless daydreams. I should like to give an example of a dream idea of this type, which takes the shell as the clearest proof of life's ability to constitute forms. According to this theory, which was propounded in the 18th century by J.B. Robinet, everything that has form has a shell ontogenesis, and life's principal effort is to make shells. It is my opinion that at the center of Robinet's immense evolutionary table there was a vast dream of shells. Indeed, the title alone of one of his books, Philosophical Views on the Natural Gradation of Forms of Existence, or the Attempts Made by Nature While Learning to Create Humanity, Amsterdam, 1768, describes the orientation of his thinking. Those who have the patience to read the entire work will discover a veritable commentary, in dogmatic form, on the type of drawings I mentioned earlier. Here, too, partial animal forms appear on every side. Fossils for Robinet are bits of life, rough casts of separate organs, which will find their coherent life at the summit of an evolution that is preparing the way for man. We might say that inside of a man's body is an assemblage of shells. Each organ has its own causality that has already been tried out during the long centuries when nature was teaching herself to make man with one shell or another. The function constructs its form from old models, and life, although only partial, constructs its abode the way the shellfish constructs its shell. If one can succeed in reliving this partial form, in the precision of a life that endows itself with a form, the being that possesses form dominates thousands of years. For every form retains life, and a fossil is not merely a being that once lived, but one that is still alive, asleep in its form. The shell is the most obvious example of a universal, shell-oriented life. All of this is firmly stated by Robinet. Quote, I am persuaded that fossils are alive, he writes, if not from the standpoint of an exterior form of life, for the reason that they lack, perhaps, certain limbs and senses. I should hesitate to assert this, however, at least from that of an interior hidden form of life, which is very real of its kind, even though quite inferior to that of a sleeping animal or a plant. But far be it from me to deny them the organs necessary to the functioning of their vital economy, and whatever their form, I consider it as a progress toward the form of their analogues in the vegetable world, among insects, large animals, and lastly among men. Robinet's book goes on to give descriptions, accompanied by very fine engravings, of lithocardites, heartstones, and cephalites, which are a prelude to the brain, stones that imitate a jawbone, the foot, the kidney, the ear, the eye, the hand, muscles, then orchids, diorchids, triorchids, the preapolites, collites, and phalloids, which imitate the male organs, and hysteropecia, which imitate the female organs. It would be a mistake to see nothing in this, but a reference to language habits that name new objects by comparing them with other commonplace ones. Here, names think and dream, the imagination is active. Lithocardites are heart shells, rough drafts of a heart that one day will beat. Robinette's mineralogical collections are anatomical parts of what man will be when nature learns to make him. A critical mind will object that our 18th century naturalist was a victim of his imagination. A phenomenologist, however, who avoids all criticism on principle, cannot fail to recognize that in the very extravagance of the being given to words, in the extravagance of his images, is manifested a profound daydream. On all occasions, Robinet thinks of form from the inside out. For him, life originates forms, and it is perfectly natural that life, which is the cause of forms, should create living forms. Once again, for such daydreams as these, form is the habitat of life. Shells, like fossils, are so many attempts on the part of nature to prepare forms of the different parts of the human body. They are bits of man and bits of woman. In fact, Robinet gives a description of the conch of Venus that represents a woman's vulva. A psychoanalyst would not fail to see a sexual obsession in these designations and descriptions that enter into such detail, nor would he have any difficulty finding, in the Shell Museum, such representations of phantasms as that of the toothed vagina, which is one of the principal themes of Marie Bonaparte's study of Edgar Allan Poe. Indeed, if we listen to Robinet, we should be inclined to believe that nature went mad before man did. And one can imagine the diverting reply that Robinet would make in defense of his system to the observations of psychoanalysts or psychologists. With simple gravity, he wrote, "We should not be surprised at the assiduity with which nature has multiplied models of the generative organs in view of the importance of these organs." With a dreamer of scholarly thoughts such as Robinet, who organized his visionary ideas into a system, a psychoanalyst accustomed to untangling family complexes would be quite powerless. We should need a cosmic psychoanalysis, one that would abandon for a second human considerations and concern itself with the contradictions of the cosmos. We should also need a psychoanalysis of matter which, at the same time that it accepted the human accompaniment of the imagination of matter, would pay closer attention to the profound play of the images of matter. Here, in the very limited domain in which we are studying images, we should have to resolve the contradictions of the shell, which at times is so rough outside and so soft, so pearly in its intimacy. How is it possible to obtain this polish by means of friction with a creature that is so soft and flabby? And doesn't the finger that dreams as it strokes the intimate mother-of-pearl surface surpass our human, all too human dreams? The simplest things are sometimes psychologically complex. Yep. But if we were to allow ourselves to indulge in all the daydreams of inhabited stone, there would be no end to it. Curiously enough, these daydreams are at once long and brief. It is possible to go on with them forever, and yet reflection can end them with a single word. At the slightest sign, the shell becomes human, and yet we know immediately that it is not human. With a shell, the vital inhabiting impulse comes to a close too quickly. Nature obtains too quickly the security of a shut-in life. But a dreamer is unable to believe that the work is finished when the walls are built. And thus it is that shell-constructing dreams give life and action to highly geometrically associated molecules. For these dreams, the shell, in the very tissue of its matter, is alive. Proof of this may be found in a great natural legend.